In this tutorial, I'll show you how to build a very simple but powerful volume intensity indicator for the ThinkOrSwim platform. The whole goal of this indicator is to allow you to compare 5 different symbols of your choice and to very quickly get a scale that allows you to find when is volume giving you a trade opportunity. Now, there's a few key reasons why I built this indicator, but I think before I go through the PowerPoint slides, it's best to just show you what we're building. So here's an example of the actual volume indicator that we're going to build in today's tutorial together. Now, as the user, you can input 5 different symbols of your choosing. Right now, I have Apple, Microsoft, Meta, Google, and NVIDIA loaded on. If I wanted to change any of these symbols, I could, and you'll learn how to create user input variables that allow you to do just this. I also have a length variable, which calculates what is the length we're going back to see the different colors that are plotting on the chart. We're using this length to connect volume with volume average and create our own scaling system, so it's really easy to spot when we have clusters of high volume setups across 5 different symbols, along with periods of low volume across these same 5 different symbols, where you might be looking at more muted volatility, calm price action, maybe the calm before the storm. Now, in a future video, I'll show you how to read these patterns. This video, I want to show you how to build this indicator first. Now, as we go through this, and even you start using the indicator, you'll notice that it allows you to do a few main things which I think lack in the current volume indicator ecosystem. The first is it allows you to track changes in volume strength quickly. What I mean by that is as we build this indicator, we're really comparing 2 different variables you'll see. We're comparing the current day's volume to the volume average. So the average volume, and you saw I had the 50-day average volume. Once we make that comparison, we're creating our own scaling ratio of sorts to then be able to find when is that increased volume versus decreased volume. We calculate that per each symbol, but when you combine that, you start to see a slightly broader overview, especially during things like earnings season and which stock is moving what market. Now, the next thing that this indicator allows you to do is to spot those clusters visually easily. You saw when we were looking at our ThinkOrSwim chart that it was very easy to spot when you had periods of this light green across, in this case, 4 different symbols. Same thing with the light red, which tells you when that volume is less than half of the average volume, which is also a little bit unusual. All of these values you can change based off of whatever you'd like, and I'll show you how to do that as we actually go through and write the code. Now, the last thing that this indicator is meant to help you do is it's meant to help make it easier to highlight whenever that momentum is actually shifting. And I think this indicator will work quite well with something like our momentum cross. You combine when you have periods of high volatility with a little bit of that muted volatility kicking in and wait for that momentum to shift. And that's when you'll see oftentimes tends to be some nice trade setups based off of volume. It's not on the day that the spike actually happens, it's shortly after that, and this indicator allows you to pinpoint when you'd like to enter. Now, as we go through this, we'll make some more enhancements, but for the time being in this tutorial, here's what you're going to learn. You'll learn how to set up volume inputs for multiple symbols. This means 5 different symbols where the user can change those symbols directly from the settings menu. You'll learn how to do that yourself. After that, we'll take those input variables and we'll connect them to the actual calculations. And once we've pulled and referenced the right volume data for each symbol, we'll create that volume intensity variable. When we create this volume intensity variable, or this ratio rather, you'll see how it plots, you'll see the different values it can be. And when we identify that, we'll then move on to create a color coding system, something that scales this into useful information. And finally, some formatting tricks that then takes all of this information and makes it really easy for us to actually visualize and get the information we need. As always, I'll leave a link to download the indicator in the description box below. So if you want to follow along with the indicator downloaded, you can have the code side by side and follow along so it's a little bit easier. All right, let's jump straight into ThinkOrSwim and start writing some code. To get started with writing some code, I'm going to click the studies icon up here and then click create, which will open up our indicator file. Now start by giving your indicator a name. I'll call mine TI_volume intensity. And we can remove all of the code that's inside here. The plot data is equal to close. Now the first line that I'd like to write is declare lower. This will tell ThinkOrSwim that this indicator should always go on the lower panel. Think where RSI's or the ATR indicator goes. That way we don't have to worry about it ever printing on the upper panel. So that's what this first line does, declare lower. The next thing that I think we will need is the length. We're going to make this an input field so that the user can easily modify it. And I'll use a length of 20 as our starting point. Now this length is going to be important because it will be how far back we go to calculate whatever the average volume is. Now after this, I can think that our next step would probably be to create variables for each of the 5 symbols we want to compare. So I'll say input symbol 1, and here open quote, Apple. And I'll use the text docs here as an example. So let's say symbol 2, Microsoft. Input symbol 3, let's say Meta. Input symbol 4, let's say Google. And then input symbol 5, let's say NVIDIA. All right, so now we have our 5 symbols, but we still get the error, at least one plot should be defined. All we've done so far is just tell ThinkOrSwim this is a lower panel chart, our length is 20, which the user can modify, and these are the 5 symbols we're going to use as our default, but again, given that they're input fields, the user can modify them. And I'll show you where they can modify that in just a second. So if I was to write simply plot signal equals 1, so that error goes away, now I can hit OK to compile the code. And if I double click this, this is where the user can change all of those input fields. So if I wanted to change the symbol, I could do that. If I wanted to change the length, I could do that. Now I click this scroll icon to come back inside of the code. I'll delete this plot signal equals 1. And let's keep going down our code where now we've finished all of our inputs. I think the next thing we can do is actually write the code for our first symbol. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll say volume data for symbol 1. And inside of this, the first thing I can think that we need to fetch is simply the volume data. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll say def vol1. And notice I'm putting a 1 at the end of all of the variables here for symbol 1. The reason I do that is so when we need to do this for symbols 2, 3, 4, and 5, all we need to do is a control find and replace for the number 1 or vol1, etc. And we can very quickly create new variables. You can also use something like ChatGPT once you've created the first set of logic to replicate that. Now let's say def vol1 is equal to volume symbol is equal to, and we're going to tie this to our symbol 1 variable. That way we know that the volume we're getting is for this first symbol, not the current symbols chart that you're on. Now we need to repeat this for the next set of 4 symbols as well, but we're going to write all of the code for symbol 1 together, and then we'll move on to symbol 2. Now that we've calculated the volume, the next thing we need to do is calculate the volume average. So I'll say vol average 1, and this time we'll say it's equal to, we'll call the average function. We'll take the average value of vol 1 over the length that we created up here. And that now gives us our average volume. This gives us a baseline that we can use for comparing the current day's volume to. Now the next thing is creating some sort of a scaling variable, which I'm going to call intensity. We'll say def intensity 1 is equal to, and we can simply just take the ratio of the volume compared to the average and use that as our starting point to determine what is the scale that we'd like to use. This ratio will essentially show us how strong is that current day's volume compared to the average, and that's what we're looking to measure with intensity 1. Now, after we've created the intensity variable, I think we have most everything that we need to actually start plotting our indicators. So let's create the variable that will actually plot this. I'll say plot vol condition 1, and here we can say if is nan close. So what we're checking is, does the value close not exist, and is this not true, meaning the value does exist? Then we'll say 1, else 0. And let's see what happens if we simply did this. Click apply, apply, and now we can see that this variable will always plot at that value 1, and you can also see that it's still plotting 0 here for candles in which that closing price does not exist. So we need to add in some code to fix this, and we'd also like to change this to be points instead of a line. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say, first of all, instead of 0, let's set this to double.nan. And one other thing I'm going to change, since this is plotting at 1, but really we want symbol 1 to be plotting at the top, so it will go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Instead of 1 here, we need to set this equal to 5, so it prints at the topmost since we have 5 symbols. And now I can say vol condition 1 dot set painting strategy, and we can use the painting strategy dot points. Now if I click apply, you can see that this changes to points, plotting at the value 5 instead of 1, and we no longer see those 0 points or plotting for wherever the close price does not exist. Now we can, first of all, make these dots a little bit bigger so they're easier to see. I'll set their line weight to 3. So notice how the dots got a little bit bigger. And now we can add in some code to actually take our intensity variable and change the color of these dots so we actually get some useful information. Right now, all of the dots are cyan, doesn't tell us anything interesting. Now, the first thing I think you may want to do to try and understand what's going on is, let's say, plot intensity 1 instead of a def. And we can see that this intensity value basically varies right now, at least on this current chart, from a value of 0 up to about 5. Now keep in mind, intensity is simply measuring what is the current day's volume compared to the average. So this day, for example, it was 5 times the average. That's what this bar is telling us. So the way that we can make use of intensity now is by saying something like vol condition 1 dot assign value color. So this allows us to make the color dynamic. Now there's going to be a lot of code here, so I'm going to press enter, close out this parentheses, create some space, and I'll write the first if statement, which says if our intensity 1 variable, and let's say is greater than 2. That seems like a fair point. So our current day's volume is more than 2 times that of the average. So I'll say if intensity 1 is greater than 2, then color dot light green, which suggests very high volume. Else, we could say if intensity 1 is greater than, let's say, 1.5. And keep in mind, I'm going down the line here, so it will start by checking this first. If this is true, it will print light green. If this is not true, then it will move to 1.5, which is how I'm able to get away with simply checking if this is greater than 1.5 and not needing to check if it's also less than 2. So here we can now scale this. So I'll say for this color, color.green, else if intensity 1 is greater than, let's say, 1. So now we're at the same day's volume, or at the current day's volume is the same as our average volume, There we can make this dark green. Else we can say if our intensity 1 is now maybe greater than 0.75, let's say then color dot, let's say dark red. And I'm going inverse here. If intensity is greater than 0.5, then color dot red. And then I'll say else color dot light red. And I think that should be enough to close it out. Intensity 1. And now, if I were to click apply, so remember, I've changed this plot back to a depth, and now I'm going to click apply, you should notice that now the dots start to have a little bit more meaning. Wherever you see these green dots, that tells you that your current day's volume is greater than your 20-day average volume. Let's say instead of 20, we wanted to change this to 50. Simply, in fact, actually, come inside to the studies menu, change this from 20 to 50 here, click OK, apply, and all of a sudden this recalculates for you. So that's how we can make use of the input field and the intensity field to plot some real values on these dots that allows you to get some visual information. When do you have greater than average volume? When do you have periods of much less than average volume? The lighter the red color, that means it's far less than average, which oftentimes is that muted volatility before you see this actual uptick. So there's lots of patterns that you can study here, which maybe we'll do in a later video. Now, the next thing that we need to do, since we're going to have 5 symbols, and I want to write all the code in one go, is I want to have some sort of a chart bubble, some way to know what is this row compared to the row underneath it, compared to the row underneath that. Now, to create the chart bubble, we're going to use the add chart bubble function. And inside of the chart bubble takes in 4 different parameters. The first parameter is when do you want to see this chart bubble plotting? Now, we only want to see it plotting on this very last candle. I don't want to see it on every single point, and I don't want to see it on points after either. So to have it plot only on the last one, what I can say is something like is nan, and we're going to check if the candle on the next bar does not exist. And if this is the case, so if this is nan right here, then only do we want to see this chart bubble plot. The next value is where do you want to see this plot? This is going to be the same as this number right here, the number 5. So I'll put in the number 5. After that, we have the third parameter, which is what do you want to see inside of the chart bubble? That's going to be symbol 1, the actual symbol. And after that, we have the color, which the color is going to follow the same logic as what we just created up here. So I can simply paste that in, close out this chart bubble code, click apply. And right now this is plotting in all of the bars after. So let's add in a simple check of if close is greater than 0. And now we should see only Apple on that most last bar matching the color, which tells you what the symbol is. So I think this brings us to the end of symbol 1's code. What we've done so far, if we were to do a quick recap, we've fetched the volume for symbol 1, which is dynamic to whatever the user selects. We then calculate whatever the volume average is, going back a length, which is also what the user can select. Once we have that, we calculate an intensity value, which is just a ratio between the current day's volume and the average volume. And once we have that, we then plot that using points with the scaling ratio from 2 down to less than even the number 1, which tells you where you have greater than average volume along with less than average volume in one go. Now our next step is to extend this for all of the remaining symbols that we actually have. Now to extend this code to multiple symbols, I'll show you how to use something like ChatGPT to do that, including the free version. So let's load in the free version of ChatGPT here. You'll see nothing logged in. And I'm simply going to say, take this code and change all of the variable names that end in 1 to now end in 2 so that this works for symbol 2 as well. And then I'll just paste in the code that we wrote here. And let's see what ChatGPT gives us. And there we have it. So this was a lot easier than even going into text editors and whatnot. And you'll find oftentimes that ChatGPT is not good at creating these indicators from scratch, but it is very good at doing some of these very basic tasks for you. Now, remember, symbol 2, we will need to change this numerical value from 5 to 4 since we're going down. But let's go ahead and see what happens if we were to paste this in. So I'm going to copy all of this code, come in here, paste it, change this value from a 5 to a 4, and change this value from a 5 to a 4. Let's do a quick scan to make sure everything else looks okay. I think it does. Click apply. And we can now see Microsoft also plotting here. Now this looks a little bit funky because we just have 2 numbers so far. So let's continue repeating this for symbols 3, 4, and 5. And I'm going to ask ChatGPT to do that all in one go. So I'll come inside of our message board here and I'll say repeat for symbols 3, symbols 4, or symbol 4, symbol 3, symbol 4, and symbol 5. And I can manually change each of these. So symbol 3 will now be plotting on number 3, symbol 4 on number 2, and then symbol 5 on 1. So let's go ahead and copy this code, come back inside of ThinkOrSwim, paste this towards the bottom, and I'll start from symbol 5, changing our chart bubble from that 5 and our plot from a 5 to a 1. This one will be 2 for symbol 4. And then for symbol 3, we'll be plotting at the 3 numerical point. And now see how the scale here changes given what we just did. So I'll click apply. And now we have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now this still looks a little bit funky to me. So that's where I have this neat little trick that I like to use, which is adding in 2 baselines. So we'll say plot 0 is equal to 0, and then plot 6 in this case, since we have 5 symbols, is equal to 6. These are just simple lines, but you'll notice this actually draws 2 lines on your chart, and now everything starts to look a little bit nicer and much more scaled in. I don't want to actually see those lines, so the quick little thing that we can do is say set default color, color.black, since I have black charts, and I'll repeat that for 6, set default color, color.black, apply, and now those lines are a little bit more invisible. You can still see them slightly, but I think this looks much, much cleaner. So there you have it. We've built our very own volume intensity indicator, which allows you to spot when you have periods of increased volume across 5 different symbols, along with periods of decreased or muted volume less than its average. If you wanted to tweak this indicator, here are some quick things that come to my mind. The first is playing around with the length. We've tried 50, we've tried 20. You could also try a shorter length if you wanted to look at much shorter term volume, but I think 50 is that nicer, safer bet. But the other thing you might want to try and do is change some of these intensity scaling ratios. You saw how those varied. We used 2 to keep things simple, but you might want to try changing some of these thresholds where what you consider to be muted volatility might be something even less than, say, 0.5 of the volume average. There's lots of ways that you can tweak this to essentially find and make use of volume information across 5 different symbols. I hope you found this indicator tutorial useful in learning how to build your very own volume intensity indicator that compares 5 different symbols, it plots all 5 in one go, and it actually makes sense of information for each symbol. If you wanted to change any of these values, say you wanted to compare only the index markets, you could easily do that by simply just coming inside of the settings menu and changing this value right here, and all of a sudden you'll see the volume data for whatever symbols you're looking at. I think this indicator makes it really easy to spot some of the volume trades and setups that form that typically you have to keep an eye and actually monitor for. This indicator allows you to monitor on its behalf, let it do a lot of the heavy lifting, see these colors, trace some of the patterns, and use that to pinpoint when momentum is reversing. Now, a quick recap of what we did in this ThinkScript tutorial. We started off by creating all of the different input variables. We did the input variables for the multiple symbols. We did the input variable for the actual length value. We also used the declare lower, telling ThinkOrSwim that, hey, we want to print this only on the lower panel chart. After that, we moved on to taking that user input, so whatever the user chooses for symbol 1 plus the length, and we moved on to actually connecting that and fetching the volume data for that particular symbol, along with the average for that particular symbol. When we had the volume and the average, we then moved on to creating and calculating this volume intensity variable. This ended up being a ratio which we saw could vary greatly, but we ended up using a scale in which we used the value greater than 2 as our most upper bound and the value less than 0.5 as our lowest lower bound. We use that to then create this color coding system, and that's what populates the green and the red that you see on our chart. Both extremes give you useful information. Finally, we use some formatting tricks like that is-nan close trick to plot that chart bubble only on that last bar, and it makes it really easy to know which symbol is which of those 5 rows. Plus, we use some neat tricks with that baseline, the 0 and the 6 values, to shrink our indicator and make it a little bit more scalable inside of a certain range. I hope you found this tutorial useful in understanding how to not only use ThinkOrSwim to build something powerful, but also use the ThinkScript language to get the information you need and turn it into something useful and visual information that you can capitalize on. Again, I'll leave a link to download the indicator in the description box below. Feel free to download the indicator and tweak it on your own end to improve it based off of your personal trading style. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you in our next trading tutorial.